The marriage contract lay spread across the mahogany desk like a death sentence, its formal language as cold and precise as the autumn rain pelting against the library windows. Alexander Blackwood read through the terms one final time, his steel-gray eyes scanning the carefully crafted clauses that would bind him to a woman he had never met. 1 year, he murmured to himself, his voice echoing in the vast book-lined chamber. 12 months to secure the inheritance, then freedom for us both. It was a business arrangement, nothing more. His grandfather's will had been explicit: marry before his 30th birthday, or forfeit the Blackwood fortune to distant cousins who had been circling like vultures since the old man's death. Alexander had exactly 6 weeks to find a bride, and conventional courtship was a luxury he couldn't afford. The sound of carriage wheels on gravel announced her arrival. Alexander straightened his cravat and moved to the window, watching as a modest coach pulled up to Blackwood Manor's imposing entrance. The woman who emerged was not what he had expected. Miss Evangeline Hartwell was small and delicate, with auburn hair pinned severely back and a traveling dress that spoke of careful economy rather than fashion. She moved with quiet dignity, her chin held high despite the obvious intimidation of the grand estate before her. When she looked up at the manor's towering facade, Alexander caught a glimpse of intelligent green eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "She's here, my lord," announced Pemberton, the elderly butler who had served the Blackwood family for 40 years. "Show her to the blue drawing room," Alexander replied, already dreading the awkward conversation ahead. "I'll join her presently." When Alexander entered the drawing room, he found Evangeline standing before the massive fireplace, studying a portrait of his late grandfather with an expression of thoughtful curiosity. She turned as he approached, and he was struck by the directness of her gaze. No simpering, no false modesty, just clear-eyed assessment. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, offering a small curtsy. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." "Miss Hartwell." Alexander bowed formally. "I trust your journey was comfortable?" "Adequate, thank you." She clasped her hands before her, the picture of composure despite the extraordinary circumstances. "Shall we discuss the terms of our arrangement?" Her directness caught him off guard. Most women of his acquaintance would have spent at least 20 minutes on pleasantries before approaching such a delicate subject. "Indeed," Alexander said, gesturing toward a pair of chairs arranged near the fire. "I believe my solicitor has explained the situation?" "He has." Evangeline settled into her chair with practiced grace. "You require a wife to satisfy the conditions of your inheritance. I require financial security for my younger siblings. A marriage of convenience serves both our purposes." Alexander studied her profile as she spoke. There was something almost regal about the way she held herself, despite her obvious reduced circumstances. "And you understand that this would be a temporary arrangement? 1 year, as specified in the contract." "I will be your wife for only 1 year," Evangeline declared, her voice steady and clear. "After which, we shall both be free to pursue our separate lives. I ask only that the agreed-upon sum be settled on my family before the marriage is dissolved." The matter-of-fact way she spoke of their future divorce should have been reassuring. Instead, Alexander found himself oddly unsettled by her clinical approach to what would be, legally at least, a sacred bond. "There is one other matter," he said carefully. "The marriage must appear genuine to satisfy the will's conditions. We would need to cohabitate. Maintain the appearance of a normal married couple." A faint blush colored Evangeline's cheeks, but her voice remained steady. "I understand. Separate bedrooms, of course, but public appearances as husband and wife. I am prepared for that. And after the year is complete? I shall return to my family with the means to ensure their comfort and security. You shall have your inheritance and your freedom. A fair exchange, I believe." Alexander found himself nodding, though something about the arrangement left him feeling strangely hollow. "Then we are agreed. The ceremony can take place next week if that suits you." "It does." Evangeline rose from her chair, smoothing her skirts. "I should like to see my room if I may. I have some personal effects to arrange." As Pemberton led her away, Alexander remained in the drawing room, staring into the fire and wondering why he felt as though he had just made a terrible mistake. The marriage would solve his immediate problems, certainly, but something in Evangeline Hartwell's eyes suggested there were depths to this arrangement that neither of them fully understood. 3 days later, as he helped her settle into the east wing of the manor, Alexander discovered just how right his instincts had been. While moving a trunk to her dressing room, the leather case slipped from his hands, spilling its contents across the Persian carpet. Among the scattered belongings was a small leather-bound journal, its pages filled with Evangeline's careful handwriting. Alexander bent to retrieve it, intending to return it immediately, but a single line caught his eye, a line that made his blood run cold and changed everything he thought he knew about his convenient bride. Day 847 since father's death. The creditors grow more insistent, and I fear we have perhaps a month before they seize the house. Margaret's cough worsens, and without proper medicine. I cannot bear to think of it. If this marriage arrangement fails, I do not know what will become of us all. Alexander's hands trembled as he read on, each entry revealing a story of quiet desperation and fierce love that made his own problems seem trivial by comparison. This was no cold business arrangement for Evangeline Hartwell. It was a last desperate gamble to save her family from ruin. And buried deeper in the journal's pages, he found something that shattered his assumptions completely. Entries that spoke of dreams deferred, of a heart that had learned to hope for nothing, and of a woman who had convinced herself that a loveless marriage was the best she could ever expect from life. But it was the final entry, written the night before her arrival at Blackwood Manor, that stopped his heart entirely. Alexander's hands trembled as he read the final entry, dated just the night before Evangeline's arrival at Blackwood Manor. The words seemed to burn themselves into his memory, each carefully penned line revealing a truth that made his chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't name. Tomorrow I go to him, this stranger who will become my husband for the sake of convenience and coin. I have told myself 1,000 times that it matters not what he thinks of me, that this is merely a transaction. But in the quiet hours before dawn I find myself wondering, what would it be like to be truly wanted? Not for what I can provide or what problems I can solve, but simply for who I am? I suppose I shall never know. Some women are born for love, others for duty. I have made my peace with being the latter. The journal slipped from Alexander's fingers, landing softly on the carpet beside the scattered contents of Evangeline's trunk. He stared at the delicate handwriting, feeling as though he had just witnessed something sacred and private, a soul laid bare in the safety of solitude. My lord. Pemberton's voice from the doorway made Alexander start. Is everything quite all right? Alexander quickly gathered the spilled items, his movements sharp and agitated. Fine, Pemberton. Just an accident with Mrs. Blackwood's trunk. The title felt strange on his tongue. They had been married for exactly 3 days, a brief ceremony in the village church with only Pemberton and the vicar's wife as witnesses. Evangeline had worn a simple blue dress and carried a small bouquet of late roses from the manor's garden. She had spoken her vows clearly and calmly, as if she were reciting a shopping list rather than pledging her life to a stranger. Shall I have one of the maids assist with the unpacking? Pemberton inquired, his keen eyes noting his master's obvious distress. No, Alexander said quickly, clutching the journal against his chest. I'll handle it myself. As Pemberton withdrew with a puzzled expression, Alexander sank into the chair beside Evangeline's dressing table, the journal heavy in his hands. He knew he should return it immediately, pretend he had never seen its contents. But the words had already taken root in his mind, painting a picture of the woman he had married that was entirely different from the composed, practical creature who had agreed to their arrangement. The sound of footsteps in the corridor made him look up. Through the partially open door, he could see Evangeline approaching, her arms full of linens that she had insisted on arranging herself despite the staff's protests. She moved with quiet efficiency, but Alexander now noticed things he had missed before. The way she paused to straighten a crooked picture in the hallway, the gentle smile she offered to a young housemaid who curtsied nervously as she passed. Mr. Blackwood? Evangeline's voice from the doorway made him realize he had been staring. I didn't expect to find you here. Alexander rose quickly, the journal still in his hands. I was helping to move your trunk and there was an accident. Some of your belongings scattered. Evangeline's eyes immediately went to the journal, and Alexander saw something flicker across her face, a moment of pure panic quickly suppressed. I see, she said carefully, setting down the linens and moving toward him with measured steps. I hope nothing was damaged. No, nothing damaged, Alexander replied, extending the journal toward her. But as she reached for it, their fingers brushed, and he found himself reluctant to let go. Evangeline, may I ask you something? She stiffened at his use of her given name. In the 3 days since their marriage, they had maintained scrupulous formality, addressing each other as Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood in public and avoiding private conversation altogether. Of course, she said, though her voice carried a note of wariness. Why did you really agree to this marriage? Alexander asked, studying her face. And please don't tell me it was merely for financial security. I think there's more to it than that. Evangeline's composure never wavered, but Alexander caught the slight tightening around her eyes. I'm not sure what you mean. The terms were quite clear. The terms were clear, yes. But you are not quite what I expected. Alexander moved closer, noting how she held herself perfectly still, like a deer sensing a predator. You're educated, well-spoken, clearly from a good family. Surely there were other options available to you? Were there? Evangeline's voice carried a bitter edge that she quickly suppressed. You speak as though I had a dozen suitors lined up at my door. The reality, Mr. Blackwood, is that women in my position have very few choices. I chose the one that would best serve my family's needs. And what about your needs? The question slipped out before Alexander could stop it, and he saw Evangeline's carefully maintained mask slip for just a moment. My needs are irrelevant, she said quietly, reaching again for the journal. This time, Alexander let her take it, watching as she clutched it against her chest like a shield. I learned long ago that happiness is a luxury I cannot afford. The simple statement hit Alexander like a physical blow. He thought of his own complaints about the marriage arrangement, his resentment at being forced into an unwanted union. But his problems were temporary inconveniences compared to the quiet desperation he had glimpsed in Evangeline's journal. Evangeline, he said softly, and this time she didn't correct his informality. What if this arrangement didn't have to be quite so cold? We're going to be living as husband and wife for a year. Perhaps we could at least try to be friends. She looked at him with those intelligent green eyes, and Alexander saw her weighing his words, searching for hidden meanings or ulterior motives. Friends, she repeated slowly. I'm not sure I understand what you're proposing. I'm proposing that we make the best of our situation. Share meals, conversation. Get to know each other as people rather than simply business partners. Alexander found himself genuinely wanting her agreement, though he couldn't quite explain why. It would make the year more pleasant for both of us, don't you think? Evangeline was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the journal's leather binding. And at the end of the year? When the arrangement concludes. Then we part as friends rather than strangers, Alexander said, though even as he spoke the words, something in his chest rebelled against the idea of her leaving. Very well, Evangeline said finally. Friends? But I want to be clear about the boundaries, Mr. Blackwood. This changes nothing about our agreement. 1 year and then we both go our separate ways. Of course, Alexander agreed, though he was beginning to suspect that nothing about this arrangement would be as simple as either of them had anticipated. As Evangeline moved to continue her unpacking, Alexander found himself watching her with new eyes. The composed, practical woman he had married was still there, but now he could see the vulnerability she worked so hard to hide, the dream she had buried beneath layers of duty and sacrifice. Evangeline? He called as she reached the door. Yes. Would you join me for dinner tonight? In the small dining room, not the formal one. We could talk. As friends do. She paused, her hand on the doorframe. I would like that, she said softly, and for the first time since their wedding, Alexander saw a genuine smile cross her face. As she disappeared down the corridor, Alexander remained in her room, surrounded by the scattered remnants of a life carefully packed away. He thought about the journal entries he had read, about the woman who believed herself destined for duty rather than love, and felt something shift in his chest, a determination he hadn't expected. Perhaps their marriage was meant to be temporary, but that didn't mean it had to be meaningless. And perhaps, just perhaps, he could show Evangeline Hartwell that some women were indeed born for love. They just needed the right person to help them discover it. But as Alexander made his way back to his own chambers, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into dangerous territory. The journal had revealed more than Evangeline's secrets. It had revealed his own capacity for feelings he had never intended to develop. 1 year suddenly seemed both impossibly long and terrifyingly short. 6 months had passed since that first dinner in the small dining room, and Alexander could no longer remember what his life had been like before Evangeline. What had begun as polite conversation between strangers had blossomed into something neither of them had anticipated: genuine companionship, shared laughter, and a connection that grew stronger with each passing day. The change in Evangeline had been gradual but profound. The rigid composure had softened into natural grace, her rare smiles had become frequent laughter, and the guarded woman who had arrived at Blackwood Manor had revealed herself to be witty, passionate, and achingly beautiful when she forgot to hide behind her walls. But it was the letter that arrived on a cold February morning that shattered the careful equilibrium they had built. Alexander found Evangeline in the morning room, the opened letter trembling in her hands, her face pale as winter snow. Tears, the first he had ever seen her shed, traced silent paths down her cheeks. Evangeline. He was beside her in an instant, his hand covering hers. What's happened? Margaret, she whispered, her voice breaking on her sister's name. The fever has worsened. The doctor says, he says there's a new treatment available in London, but it's expensive and... She couldn't finish, her composure finally crumbling completely. Alexander read the letter over her shoulder, his jaw tightening as he absorbed the desperate words from Evangeline's aunt. Margaret, barely 16 and the light of Evangeline's life, was dying. The experimental treatment might save her, but it would cost more than the family could possibly afford, even with the money from their marriage contract. How much? Alexander asked quietly. £2,000, Evangeline said, her voice hollow. Might as well be 2 million. Even if I broke our contract now, took what you've already paid. She shook her head helplessly. It's not enough. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his mind racing. £2,000 was a significant sum, but not impossible for a man of his means. The real question was whether he was prepared to cross the line they had so carefully maintained between friendship and something deeper. I'll provide the money, he said simply. Evangeline's head snapped up, her green eyes wide with shock. Alexander, no. I can't ask that of you. Our agreement doesn't. Our agreement, Alexander interrupted, his voice gentle but firm, doesn't cover a lot of things that have happened between us these past months. But why would you? Evangeline searched his face, and Alexander saw the moment she began to understand what he was really offering. Alexander, please don't say something you'll regret. Don't make this more complicated than it needs to be. More complicated? Alexander moved closer, his hands framing her face with infinite tenderness. Evangeline, I've been in love with you for months. If that's not complicated enough, I don't know what is. The words hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to cross. Evangeline's breath caught, her eyes searching his face for any sign of deception or pity. You don't mean that, she whispered. You can't mean that. I'm nothing special, Alexander. I'm just a woman who needed rescuing, and you're a good man who... You're wrong. Alexander's thumb traced the line of her cheek, wiping away a tear. You're the woman who brought laughter back into this house. Who turned my library into a place of warmth instead of solitude. Who taught me that marriage could be a partnership instead of a prison. But our contract... Damn the contract. The vehemence in Alexander's voice surprised them both. I don't want 1 year with you, Evangeline. I want 50. I want to grow old watching you tend your garden, listening to you read to our children, falling asleep beside you every night for the rest of my life. Evangeline's composure shattered completely then, and she buried her face in her hands. You don't understand, she sobbed. I can't give you children. I can't give you the life you deserve. I'm broken, Alexander. Damaged goods that no decent man should want. Who told you that? Alexander's voice was dangerously quiet. Who made you believe such lies about yourself? Through her tears, the story came out. A tale of a father's gambling debts, a family's fall from grace, and a young woman who had been made to feel responsible for everyone else's happiness while sacrificing her own. She spoke of suitors who had disappeared when the money ran out, of well-meaning relatives who had made her feel like a burden, of a world that had taught her that her only value lay in what she could provide for others. So you see, she finished, her voice raw with pain, I was never meant for love. I was meant for duty, for sacrifice, for making the best of impossible situations. And in 6 months, when our year is up, you'll realize that too. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, absorbing the depth of her pain and the lies she had been taught to believe about herself. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady and sure. Do you know what I found in your journal that first day? He asked softly. Evangeline's eyes widened. You read my journal? Only a few pages that scattered when your trunk fell. But what I found there changed everything. Alexander took her hands in his his thumbs tracing gentle circles on her palms. I found a woman of incredible strength, fierce loyalty, and a capacity for love so deep it took my breath away. I found someone who had given up her own dreams to save her family, who had convinced herself she didn't deserve happiness because she was too busy ensuring everyone else's. Alexander. I found the woman I want to spend my life loving, he continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. Not because you need rescuing, but because you make me want to be a better man. Not because of duty or obligation, but because I can't imagine my world without you in it. Evangeline stared at him through her tears, and Alexander saw the exact moment when hope began to war with fear in her eyes. What are you asking of me? She whispered. I'm asking you to tear up our contract, Alexander said, reaching into his jacket and withdrawing the legal document that had brought them together. I'm asking you to marry me again, not for convenience or necessity but for love. I'm asking you to trust that what we've built together is real and worth fighting for. He held up the contract and with deliberate ceremony tore it in half. I'm asking you to be my wife not for 1 year, but for all the years we have left. Evangeline watched the pieces of paper flutter to the floor, her breath coming in short gasps. And Margaret? The treatment will be paid for regardless of your answer, Alexander said firmly. Your sister's life is not a bargaining chip, Evangeline. It's simply what someone does for the people they love. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of a decision that would change both their lives forever. Finally Evangeline spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm terrified, she admitted. I don't know how to be loved. I don't know how to trust that this is real. Then let me teach you, Alexander said, pulling her into his arms. Let me spend every day for the rest of our lives showing you how precious you are, how worthy of love you've always been. When Evangeline finally lifted her face to his, Alexander saw something new in her eyes, not the careful composure she had worn like armor, but the tentative, fragile beginning of hope. Yes, she whispered, and the word was like sunrise after the longest night. Yes, I'll marry you. For love this time. For always. Their kiss was soft and sweet and full of promise, sealing a bond that had nothing to do with contracts or convenience and everything to do with two hearts that had found their home in each other. Later, as they sat together planning Margaret's treatment and their new beginning, Alexander reflected on the strange turns of fate that had brought them together. What had begun as a marriage of necessity had become something neither of them had dared to dream of, a love story written in the margins of a business arrangement, a partnership that had grown into passion, a temporary contract that had become an eternal promise. Do you regret it? Evangeline asked softly, her head resting on his shoulder. Giving up your freedom for a woman who comes with so much baggage? Alexander pressed a kiss to the top of her head, breathing in the scent of lavender that always clung to her hair. The only thing I regret, he said, is that it took me 6 months to tell you I love you. I should have known from the moment I read your journal that you were going to change everything. And now? Now we have the rest of our lives to write a new story, Alexander said, his arms tightening around her. One where the girl who believed she was meant for duty discovers she was actually meant for love. Outside, snow began to fall, blanketing Blackwood Manor in pristine white. A fresh start, a clean slate, a world full of infinite possibilities for two hearts that had finally found their way home.